Hi, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your moderator, John. Today, we're going to have a couple people kind of just pop in to share their opinions. They're running a little late. But today, we have Jason and Matt and my associate Mike down there being all muted. Today, we're going to discuss the is. Oh, look, we have a Felix. Today we're going to discuss if God exists, and more to a topic that we'll touch a little later is good and evil necessary to form morals and ethics. So let's start with this. I believe in the teachings of Ludwig Feuerbach, who wrote the book Essence of Christianity. Now, Ludwig Feuerbach states that man is the mystery of religion. He projects his being into objectivity and then again makes himself an object to the projected image of himself, thus converted into a subject. Now, I believe what he's trying to say there is that God did not make man in God's image, but man made God in their image in order to answer the questions they were unable to answer. Now I'm just going to leave the floor open and you all can comment on that or whatever have you.
No takers?
I'll yield the floor.
Okay. Um, I'll jump in on that one. So, when you talk about like Ludwig Feuerbach and his like point of views, it actually reminds me of a song more or less by Jethro Tull called "My God," where it says basically it comes out and saying we lock God in a cage and bend him to our will. But to say that we created God in our image, so how could that be possible? How could someone create a higher being than themselves? That's the question with that. So how can, even as a collective entity, as human beings, can we create a creature? You know, if you're saying God exists, then you're saying that this higher power exists, this higher being, this higher creature exists. How could we create something greater than us?
Well,
So
in essence, we didn't.
there's the fault in that. There's the fault in that theory. Exactly. In essence, we didn't. So basically, what he's saying is that we just make God up for our own sense of security.
To a degree, yes. And to a degree, we've been doing it to answer questions that we could not answer for millennial. Um, how the sun rises and sets,
Mm-hmm.
what brings the weather. I mean, gods were equated to these things. Hi, Neil.
How's it
Um,
going?
and Feuerbach states that religion, in its purest form, is, and I believe this too. Christianity, in its purest form, is a great moral compass, and I believe it's needed in order for humanity to further. But I don't so much believe in the process of a god to overrule and oversee.
Okay. Um, just to be contrary, I'll disagree with you and say that God exists. Now, a lot of people will ask you, "Well, prove it." Well, and I would shoot back, disprove it. As a math teacher, especially geometry, one of the things that we look for is a null example. If you can find a null example, then you can disprove a mathematical theorem. And it's a lot, physicists and stuff like that, it's something that all mathematicians try to do. Sometimes it's easier to disprove something mathematically than it is to prove it mathematically. And if you just carry that over into faith and belief, it's not something that you will ever be able to truly disprove with any kind of science. And I would stand on the ground that the more science we learn, the closer and closer we get to potentially being able to prove actually there's a God. And one of the greatest atheists of our times, which is Stephen Hawking, although he was an atheist, right before his end, when he did his theorems on the multiverse and he revamped them, even though he disagreed with his own theorem that he helped come up with, he pretty much laid the groundwork to prove that God must exist. So, and we're talking mathematically and using physics. We live in a very, very, and let me give you some background. We live in a very, very unique time in the universe, a very specific time that allows us to do something that we wouldn't be able to do if we existed a million years earlier, a million years later. Humans, as far as we can tell through the archaeological record, have been around for about 80,000 years in some shape or form as a bipedal creature. And it's very interesting the time in the history of the universe that we exist. And when I say history of the universe, we can talk about that like very, very specifically. Because with physics, we've been able to look back at the beginning of the universe and put a date on it. And we can come to within about 5 decimal points of the Big Bang Theory and when time actually started. And this is one of the things Stephen Hawking was also working on as a theoretical physicist. Something like 13.8 billion years, roughly. There's several decimals out to that, and I'm rounding up. It's actually like 13.78, blah, blah, blah. And so we can pinpoint a time in which time started. So we can actually say this is when time in the universe started from something. And to say that it started from something means there was something that started it. There's something before the beginning.
Yeah.
Right? And that's even something that it says in the Bible. In the beginning, when it starts talking about the creation, and when the Bible was written, regardless of who wrote it, they had no concept of time when it related to the Big Bang Theory, right? That's something we put together via physics. I would dare say Stephen Hawking even hated the fact that being an atheist, his math helps us pinpoint a specific time in which something had to start something else, because everything in the world is cause and effect. It's all causality. You throw a baseball, the batter hits it, someone catches it. There's a start to something, and if there's a start to something, then everything else has something else that starts it. So it's an infinite loop of causality. So in order for there to be a beginning of time, there had to be something before time, right? And that's when you start having to think about the multiverses. And the reason I was talking about the history of the universe and had to bring that in, we can talk about the beginning of the universe all the way up to now, 3.8 billion years later. Because of our science right now and our technology and where the Earth is located, the specific star we have, right? Where we're located on the specific arm of the Milky Way, what distance we are, we're able to look out with our telescopes and see how light has moved. And that's what allows us to actually pinpoint the beginning of time, right? And if we were a million years from now or a million years earlier, where we're at technologically, we wouldn't be able to see that. So only with the specific point in time that we are now can we actually look into the universe and find our origin. And that's just mind-boggling to me, that it works so specifically like that. And that's another aspect of Stephen Hawking's multiverse, is there's only like 90 some odd elements in a periodic table, and they come together so perfectly in a universe where if gravity functioned just a little bit less or a little bit more, life couldn't even exist as we know it. So you have to start thinking about how all these puzzles mathematically and scientifically have fit together. And a watch is not random. A machine is not random. A nuclear bomb doesn't just randomly create itself. Something creates it, and something as technically massive as the universe and us being able to look out in it at this specific time and see back to the beginning and know that there had to be something before that. I mean, my 6 pound brain can't comprehend an omnipotent being that, I don't think I'm meant to. And God existing is a matter of faith or belief. So you can't disprove God, but I think science is coming little and look like in small increments closer and closer to maybe being able to prove a higher power. What that is, I can't define it.
But once we
But
mathematically figure that out, does that still make it a higher power?
well, yeah, until you can become that higher power, and then you can start talking about different religions like the Druidic religion, the Hindu religion, and even the Christian religion about becoming something higher and progressing spiritually, and the soul going on to a higher plane of existence, going back to your God form, as the Druids would have put it.
But you mentioned about being able to create higher forms. We're on the cusp of that right now with artificial intelligence. Like we are in the process of creating
Are
a higher form.
a higher form than humanity.
We'll consider, and if we
So we
achieve
can
it,
only create something that can mimic. We can only create something that can mimic to a certain degree what it is we can do. Now, if that thing evolves past us, now we got a serious problem at that point.
well, once we achieve it, it'll be smarter than us.
The computer's only as smart as its
Can we
programmer,
achieve it?
right?
Is it possible?
I mean, we're doing all kinds of crazy things. We're bioengineering humans at this point. I mean, think about it. That we have the technology. If you want a blue-eyed baby, they can make it happen. Whether or not that's ethical, but they can genetically alter and bioengineer humans. So, would it actually be a higher power, a higher creature? I would have to argue no. Um, then again, I would have to bring my mathematical background, specifically geometry. People talk about the sacred geometry. I'd have to bring my mathematical knowledge in to make that argument that we can never create something higher than us.
Can I interject here?
Go ahead.
There is a joke. It applies to the joke. It states, man achieves the ability to do everything in life, destroy all disease, solve the world hunger problem, basically creating it beyond. Once achieved, all the top scientists of humanity, all the top scientists gather together and they send elect their most brilliant brain to go and stand before God to basically tell him, we don't need you, thank you, but we can from here. So the scientist goes to the gates, brought to the altar of God, and stands before God. And he says, look, I'm sorry.
Neil apparently had an issue. There we go. Continue.
Stands before.
No, Jason, you're cutting in and out a little bit.
Okay, so he stands before the altar and says, thank you for all you've done for us, but we've evolved to the point where we no longer. God says, wait a moment. I'll make you a deal. I'll agree that you've achieved beyond me if you can do something I can do better than. Well, we can do anything. Well, create a life. The man says, okay, reaches down and gets a handful of dirt. God, your own. The moral of the story is when you talk about something that's supposed to be omnipotent and all powerful, that is a step that goes beyond our ration. You're talking about just simply bettering ourselves. You know, we cannot create something better than ourselves if we are in the image of God, because we evolve ourselves. I personally hate the word evolution, but it does apply here. And so we are evolving closer to God. But to say that we can evolve beyond God, that is.
Yeah, so
You broke up at
I
the
don't
end there.
believe we could. Yeah, go ahead and repeat your last sentence there, Ambrock.
Being able to evolve beyond God, I do not believe that is a goal.
Yeah.
Because in
We lost your
theory,
last 3 words.
as we evolve, God would be evolving if we are created in.
Well,
If we're created
God,
in,
if God's evolving, that doesn't make him an omnipotent or powerful being
By what standard?
by the one you just said.
Because
All knowing and still learning are two different things.
Right.
exactly, because knowledge of tomorrow doesn't exist today.
Not for us, but if you're claiming
Why
there
does it-
is a God, he should have that knowledge.
Why should he? Why does tomorrow exist? Why does everyone always assume tomorrow exists?
Well,
Because
see,
our sun
going
hasn't
back
blown up
to
yet.
so going back to like what I was talking about, the beginning of time and being able to pinpoint it. If we're saying there's something that was there before the beginning of time, you're talking about a creature that exists outside of our knowledge of time and space, a being that exists outside of that. So time is irrelevant. Today, tomorrow, yesterday, 1,000 years from now, we're talking about a creature that exists outside of our knowledge of
Yeah, of
time.
our own perception. Yeah,
Right. So
because our concept of
again,
time is completely different.
yeah, my 6-pound brain wouldn't be able to even conceive what it would be like to be a creature that can exist outside of time and space, right? Because I exist within time and space. And I had a similar conversation with one of my students once, completely out of the classroom and off the books, because I don't talk about this stuff in my classroom. It's something I save for like private time. I don't want people to think that I'm preaching theology of any sort inside of my classroom.
Fair enough.
My wife brought me milk and cookies. How's that?
That's awesome.
She's number one.
Yep. Everybody's giving you props, hon. But yeah, so I had this same conversation, and I go back to math a lot because that's what I know. I know math, I know history, and I dabble in a few other things, theology, whatnot, what have you. But let's think about geometry. Everybody's favorite subject in high school, right? But let's take it down very, very basic. We're not going to talk about proofs or theorems or Klein bottles or Mobius strips and infinity loops or anything like that. What we are going to talk about are dots, lines, squares, okay, and rectangles and cubes. So in geometry, you start with a dot. It's the first concept I teach. I literally put a speck on the board and I describe what that dot is. That dot is without width, it is without depth, it is without any measurable size. It is infinitely small. Not infinitely large, but infinitely small. Now, I can talk about that dot on a coordinate plane, a Cartesian plane, by giving it a coordinates, right? It's the basics of Euclidean geometry.
Yeah.
So I can talk about this speck, just a mere speck. And basically, that's all we are. We're a speck in an ever-expanding, vast, infinite universe where there's potentially multiple multiverses, right? So we are a speck. Now, I can take that speck, I can create another speck, and between those two specks, I can draw a line. Now, that line is measurable, right? So we're talking about one dimension, right? That speck, one dimension. From that, we can create a line, something we can measure, something we can talk about, something that has length but not width. We can take those lines and we can start creating shapes. We create shapes, say we turn it into a square, right? We now have a two-dimensional item. We went from one dimension, creating lines, turning into two dimensions, right? We can tell you everything about that two-dimensional item. Now, think about that speck in comparison to that two-dimensional item. That two-dimensional item is vastly greater than that one-dimensional item. And within that two-dimensional item, there's a vast number of those one-dimensional specks, infinite amount, right? That two-dimensional item, that plane that could be ever expanding in all directions, flat, that two-dimensional plane, like a sheet of paper stretching out forever in all directions, is vast and has infinite amount of specks inside of it. Well, that two-dimensional item knows everything about that one-dimensional item because it's contained within it. Right? It is basically the master of that one-dimensional item. We can take that two-dimensional item, we can further build on it and talk about third dimension. We can now build cubes. We can build spheres. We can say a sphere is a three-dimensional item, and we can expand it out forever and explain the universe, right? So we have a sphere going in all directions at all places, and we have this third dimension, Inside that third dimension are all these two dimensions, these two-dimensional planes running in all different directions, intersecting, and we have all these points and lines we can talk about. That third dimension is vastly more powerful, if you want to use the word, encompassing than the two-dimensional, right? We are three-dimensional. We know everything about the two-dimension. We can look at a two-dimensional item, tell you everything about it, and manipulate it in any way we want. We are the gods of that second dimension. Therefore, the gods of the first dimension. Everything about it we can manipulate. Now, a creature that exists outside of time and space, you have to start thinking of it as a fourth dimensional creature. Now, as third dimensional creatures, if we can look at a two-dimensional item, and even a three-dimensional item, and completely manipulate it in any way we want and be completely omnipotent, we know everything on that sheet of paper, everything on it, right? That's like God to us. So think of God like a fourth dimensional creature who can see every aspect of a third dimension, control, manipulate, and can. You following me?
Yes.
I'm trying to use geometry to explain how.
But it sounds like you're trying to quantitate something that can't be quantitated. Like,
isn't that what we do as humans?
You can't quantitate God. God is just this. I mean,
but we will try.
We try.
We are humans, damn it. We will try. Will we ever
and
succeed?
You can use examples to draw from that to try and make an ideal construct to be able to perceive and understand. So
yeah. And are you following me, Neil? What I'm talking about? Like,
oh yeah,
a fourth dimensional creature would just be so much more massive in its comprehension and its abilities than we are. And just like we can see all of everything inside of a two-dimensional, it could see everything all at the same time inside of a third dimensional, whether that's time and space, if that's what the third dimension is. Right? So
the fourth dimension sees every permeation of existence in three dimensions, not just that two dimension and one dimension, but
absolutely
not just forward and backwards, but just even alternatives. So
absolutely.
But we just see time as a linear scale.
But if you're talking dimensionally, that would mean there'd be something above it.
No, well, I'm saying that it
would be
permeating beyond that dimension.
Mm-hmm. We just only understand that, right? And who's to say if we're looking at it as a dimensional creature like that, as God is a dimensional creature, who's to say it is a fourth dimension? Maybe it's a 50th dimension creature.
Yeah.
Right. And you can see everything in every dimension below it. So it existed outside time and space. We cannot comprehend a creature that exists outside of time and space with our 6-pound brain. We're not meant to. No matter where the concept comes from, it's like comprehending the vastness of the universe We can't do that. Our minds cannot grasp that there is something that is infinite in all directions. Because what's on the outside of that? Well, it's still that. And so it just goes on within space. Um,
I want to take a minute and welcome Greg to the conversation.
Hey, Greg.
That's
Hey,
right.
Greg.
Hey guys.
Okay, I understand what you're saying there. I mean, I think that is I mean, I will give you that is a possibility. That there is a creature out there or something out there. I just don't see where the human race has equated this spiritual thing to an all-knowing, all-powerful being that controls our every move. Because I mean,
Well, see, that's the thing. It depends on what religion you're looking at and whether or not it controls every move. So if you're looking at Christianity, you have free will. It does not control your every move. You're given a decision. You make it. You're judged on it. So on.
how
and
do
so
you have
forth.
free will if he knows
But
if
every
God
move.
knows everything that's going to happen?
It's not going to interfere. Just looks at it and go, oh, he's going to do that. I wouldn't recommend it. but,
Like Neil was saying. Like Neil was saying, all possible permutations, right? So you're thinking of multiverse, and this is one of the reasons Stephen Hawkins was so upset with himself when he came up with some of these theorems, because him being an atheist, he pretty much gave us a path to kind of explain the existence of God. In his paper, he even wrote on it. If you look up his last paper on the multiverse,
Yeah, I remember when that came out. He was upset.
yeah, I mean,
Wow.
talk about a paradigm shift, and then to deny it. I mean, you're the one that come up with it, and then you deny it. I mean, that man had to be conflicted.
Yep. Especially towards the end. I mean, just imagine his last thoughts going, well, this is scientific proof. I can find out for myself. I won't be able to report the results, but hey.
Right?
So Feuerbach says that man without religion is a brute.
To an extent,
I mean, man with religion is a brute, and we see that every day.
yeah.
I don't think it's with or without religion. You got to get into talking about morals and good and evil, right and wrong, sin and righteousness. So, I mean, we even see people who do brutal, horrible things in the name of religion. Right? We've seen massacres. We've seen religion used to justify some of the greatest atrocities mankind has ever seen. So, I don't think without it we would be brutes, because we're still brutes with it.
Okay.
So, and moral compass is based more off of society and societal norms. So that's an entire, being a religious guy, being a man of faith, and I think that's what it is when you start talking about the existence of God. You have without faith, you can't even walk down that path. I guess you got to have faith.
Well, somebody who's
George
lost
Michaels, go get it.
all faith is somebody who's been crushed, even if it's just faith that the sun's going to come up.
I don't necessarily agree with you there, Matt. I believe that religion for a lot of people, and again, I don't believe in absolutes, but I believe for a lot of
me either.
people, it gives them purpose to act in a moral fashion.
Sure, some people need it
And
in order to act
so,
morally.
but again, not believing in absolutes. Some people don't need religion to act. It depends on the. It depends
Absolutely.
on the. I believe this is a situation that really depends on the individual, and cannot be quantified as a group.
Right, and that's what I was saying. John says that without religion, we would be become brutes, right? Lord of the Flies, and and even in Lord of the Flies, I don't think they were without religion. They were without um, the fear of a society that would strike back. Yeah, the fear of they were without the fear of consequences. And for some people, religion gives them that fear of consequence for bad behavior. Other people don't need it. Some people do. Whichever way, some people need uh, a structure of laws. They need that um, social contract laid down by Socrates.
Some people just like the feeling of belonging.
Yeah, Jonestown. I can
Structure.
turn out wrong. Yeah, I mean, you need structure, but even with good and evil, you got to think about societal norms. There are things that in Western culture, which is basically spread over most of the world at this point in time. What we see as Western culture or as um, Christians or whatever as being evil, other religions don't. Um, so you really got to look at societal norms. Even within Christianity, there are societal norms that change, and different things is viewed as evil by different people. Um, Case in point, I'm a Baptist, right? I was raised a Southern Baptist, and you know, and, but and in my Baptist upbringing, the thought of praying to the Virgin Mary for absolution is considered a sin because there's only one pathway to God, and that's to Jesus Christ. And so that aspect of the Catholic Church is considered pretty much a sin with most Baptists, that you would put somebody up as high as Jesus Christ when you're talking about praying to God and stuff like that. So even within Christianity, there's conflicts on what's morally right and wrong.
Example of that is I was raised an offshoot Methodist. And the idea of the offshoot Methodist is not just enough to be born again and say you believe in Christ, but you have to actually act the act and walk the walk. And you can revert back in ways and lose your way.
It's called backsliding, isn't it?
Yes, it's
Does any
So
do any of my other members here have? I know Greg has a point of view that is different from others, and
Yeah, sorry, there was a lot of background noise, so I wasn't trying to pipe in too much. But now that I've got that worked out, I don't think that God is necessary for a society to have morals. And
agreed.
we were talking about like differences within Christianity about how much reverence Mary should be given since she is the mother of Jesus.
Correct.
Um, isn't Jesus just basically a shortcut for being able to get to God without having the temple, according to the very earliest practices when Christianity was still a Jewish sect?
okay.
Sorta. It was a reteaching, a revamping, and a movement away from the Old Testament, and a move away from like blood sacrifice and so on and so forth.
Right.
And
Necessary because the temple had gotten destroyed.
well, the temple was still there. The temple had been rebuilt, but and the temple was there during the time of Jesus. Remember, he cleansed it. He went in, turned over tables, and beat the money changers with whips. I mean, the temple was still there.
Yeah, that whole story's kind of fishy, ain't it? Considering that was like 17 acres worth of territory with Roman centurions like wandering around there to keep people from doing shit exactly like that.
Well, actually,
Uh,
17 acres of territory maybe, but where the money changers would set up would have been a much smaller area towards the. They wouldn't have been allowed into the temple proper, and that's where he turned over the tables. And as far as the
Oh.
centurions were concerned, they wouldn't have cared
You're
because
talking
it's
about
Jew on Jew violence.
yeah, Jesus' little spat about the abusing holy ground. Yeah, that was done in the
Right.
church. The guys were outside, the centurions and all that. But he's like, "What are you doing? You're basically putting profit above the human soul, and that sort of stuff." And I mean, the basic summarization is that Jesus said, "Look, you got 10 rules. They came from God. I'm here to tell you. I'm going to simplify it down to just one: love everyone as you love yourself." Basically, that's what he was trying to teach.
yeah, and to get back to that, Greg, yeah, it kind of was a shortcut, a reclarification kind of. So
We still have many
It
religions
also-
going. Sorry.
It
go on.
also allowed for Christianity also allowed for of the Old Testament and the New Testament to be brought to somebody other than as opposed to
Yeah.
being primarily for the Israelites and the Israelites alone.
yeah, it gave access to the Gentiles.
Mm.
So
Well, yeah, you got to expand your brand.
absolutely,
Okay,
In
I'm
fact, that was actually
Oh.
in a large portion of the New Testament was argument the apostles on that very subject, whether they should or they should.
okay. So let's bring divinity into this because, in my opinion, divinity is nothing more than human nature personified, free from its limits, made objective.
so what are you saying? Like divinity is the collective conscious?
No, divinity is our human nature, love, kindness, goodness, just personified into a higher being.
Sure, but we didn't create it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
again, you're going back
So
to that idea
I don't
that
believe that.
God was created by God.
Here's
When in fact humanity would be more of creation divinity as opposed to divinity
but
for
all
those
these,
who actually believe in it.
but everything that's written is, even if it's supposed to be the word of God, it's as written by man. God himself did not write any of this or put any of this down in scripture. Man did.
Yeah, the
Oh, sure.
scribes of the family writing down the
Mhm.
the way that they do things. Hence his Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah. Yeah, and different parts of the Bible were written at different times. You got to remember that they got together and they picked and chose which writings they want to keep. Psalms was written by King David, so on and so forth. I mean, uh, a lot of it's based on the letters of Paul, you know, as he was like setting up the church and a lot of his beliefs and stuff like that. In like firsthand accounts of the life of Jesus, you know, after they were written down. And there's a lot of books to the Bible which you don't get to read because they were edited out, voted out.
Mm.
And there's a whole like group of books called the Apocryphal books of the Bible, which the Catholic Church sat down and had a convention and voted on what to keep and what not to based on what they thought was most relevant. That's why you see a lot of retellings of the same stories in the Bible from different perspectives or different points of view. They were written by various peoples over various times, within, the couple hundred years after the birth of Christ. So, yeah, I mean, that's a given. I don't think anybody believes that, God booked a room in the library and sat down and typed up the Bible and then walked out and handed it to somebody. Uh, but, I think it is safe to say that a lot of it was written down from firsthand accounts or stories that were passed on, which is typical of any culture. You find that in any culture, or just about any religion that any culture that had a written language or a way to write it down, that they find a way to actually preserve it. Right? And they preserve the great deeds of their ancestors that way. And you find that all over the world in some way, shape, or form. You can go back to writings about Nebuchadnezzar and, all the way back into Samaria, that you got the Aztecs, you got hieroglyphs and cave paintings and stuff like that, all depicting. So in a lot of religious texts are going to be the retelling or the chronicling of a culture's beliefs, rituals, practices, so on and so forth.
Did we lose Greg?
Yeah, he seems to have dropped out.
Okay.
He might be back.
Mm.
Might be a connection.
So, hang on, what were you saying, John, is that we're projecting our good parts of ourselves into the image of God?
Yes.
Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay.
We
Or are we, or what do you mean?
That depends on which God you follow.
Yeah.
well, I mean, we can say we project in any God that we make. We project ourselves onto it. I mean, in the making of it, we give it human traits. We give it human emotions. We just empower it to be more than us.
Yeah, better example. And I guess probably, I mean, I'm spitballing here, but from back then, there wasn't a greater understanding of the language to be able to put into words to quantify what you're experiencing. So I reckon they probably were going, I don't understand this, but I see what looks like to be a human figure, and then so they're writing in that context of their own understanding. And
I've had those kind of experiences.
yeah.
I mean, they didn't understand dreams. And if they saw a dream, I believe John had dreams of was it John that wrote the Revelations?
John the Beloved.
John
Yes.
the Revelator. Yeah.
He had dreams of the end, and therefore he wrote them down. I mean, they could be just dreams. I mean, I have dreams of little creatures that eat batteries the other night. I mean, that's just what we dream.
Yeah. Yet when all said and done, what could have happened in reality, he was sleeping next to a bush that just happens to be a little bit influential on the dreams.
What?
I mean,
Yeah. We can never know. And
exactly.
that's why spirituality is a very personal experience.
Yeah.
That's why you can't attack it, because you're attacking someone's personal experience. You got to accept it for what it is for them. I never tried to change an atheist to a Christian. I never tried to change a Muslim to a Christian, nothing like that, because I would have to attack their personal experiences and beliefs. All I can do is share mine and see if they find some common ground with me. Right?
That's it. And that's, I mean, saying here, that's what I feel is what one of the core ideas of religion is about, is like, you don't need to go out oppressing others, but live through your example.
Absolutely.
I mean, well, the Christians oppressed. I mean,
Everybody
were-
has oppressed. Like I said earlier, people have done some atrocious things in the name of religion throughout the years. You can't find a single religion who hasn't done it. Whether you want to look at the South America, you know, they would cut the beating hearts out of their slaves and sacrifice them to make sure rain would come. I mean, whatever. People would volunteer to have their like throats cut in the Norse like cultures, you know, to be sacrifices to the gods. There's been some atrocious things done in the name of faith, regardless of what faith it is. There's been ethnic cleansing, cultural cleansing, religious cleansing of all sorts. I'm not saying that religion doesn't have blood on its hands, because anyone that says that is a fool. It does. We try to move on past that and stop using those differences to justify hate. But yeah, I mean, and that's a hard thing to get around too, is oppression. There's always going to, in some way, shape, or form, be a type of oppression as culture spreads, and you can't stop the spread of culture. That's what makes it culture. The first definition of culture, in order for it to be culture, it has to be shared. Once it's shared, it either morphs or takes over. You can look at Christianity in South America, right? And you got Santeria and stuff like that. You can look at Vodou here in Northern America, which is a mixture of North African religion and Christianity. So some things become oppressed automatically with the introduction of other cultural aspects. You can see it decade to decade if you look at clothing trends. I mean, that clothing styles is a type of culture. You know, how did we dress back in the 90s and early 2000s? Look at how kids are like dressing now. Look at before that, girls were walking around in leggings and like ankle warmers and Olivia Newton-John, you know.
There'd be guys calling out, "Show us your feet!"
Right. So like oppression, it's not as dirty of a word as people make it out to be, if it's in the right context. If you purposely oppress a people, yeah, that's bad. But certain cultural aspects will naturally become oppressed as other ones are introduced.
So I want to bring back something you said about Mary. In the Christian faith, okay, in Catholics you have the saints and Mary. But in other Christian faiths you have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. So I can't say bad Catholic for placing Mary as a conduit when you place the Holy Spirit and the Son as conduits to God.
Well, just to talk about the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, in almost every Christian religion, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost are three aspects of the same being. They are not each other, but they are aspects of the same being. Right?
Schizophrenia.
So the Father is not the Son is not the Holy Spirit, but the Holy Spirit is an aspect of God, the Son is an aspect of God, the Father is an aspect of God, right? That's why it's called the Holy Trinity. Okay, it's like think of the pagan religions with the mother, the crone, and the maiden, right? They're technically the same person. They are three aspects of the same person. So you can think of it the same way. If you go back to ancient Sumeria, you had Enki, Marduk, and the 50 names. You had Enki, the father, his son Marduk, who he blessed with the 50 names, or the 50 powers, in order to fight the Tiamat was it? And so you got the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost right there in the ancient Sumerian. It's not a completely alien concept throughout multiple cultures to have multiple aspects of the same being. Now, Mary.
Go on.
Mary was a human girl who was chosen. right? And other than giving birth to Jesus, that was her great contribution. She gave birth to the son aspect. Now to raise her up as part of the divinity that can give you absolution and grant you access to the kingdom of God. Um, Jesus himself says, "I am the way, and the light, and the truth. That no one reaches the Father except through me," so on and so forth. So within the Christian text, that is folly, right? Not that like dog and Catholics believe what you want. I think I love Catholic services, whatnot, what have you. I think they're absolutely gorgeous and beautiful, and I love the ceremony about them. But I was just trying to point out that within the Catholic religion, there are controversies on doctrine. That's why the Catholic Church split a long time ago into the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholic
Okay.
because of idolatry. But
See, a lot of Catholics actually don't believe that they can give you absolution, speak on your behalf, where
no,
you
she
pray
can
to
now.
her,
That was voted on.
and then she takes her prayers to Christ for you. Whereas
I
a
think
lot
they were putting that
of
up for a vote.
so there's that one as well. Whereas in more of your Protestant belief, they believe you only pray. The ideal of pray to no other, put no other God before me. You don't pray to someone else to speak on your behalf. You pray to God and God alone.
Right.
That's just another aspect of different
Yeah, no other idols.
theology.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and I don't know what's truly right or wrong. I'm not on the other side. I can't say for sure. I can only speak about my own personal beliefs. I guess there's only one way to know if you're right. And
When you get
there's a,
there.
right, and there's a little joke that I kind of spout that I think has a lot of wisdom in it. I'd rather be wrong about it now and be wrong when I get to the other side and God actually exists, right? So, and what I mean by that is, if there isn't a God and my belief in God is wrong, no
No
harm, no
harm, no
foul.
foul.
But once I die and there is a God and I don't believe, harm, foul. So, I'd rather be wrong now than later.
Just invoking Pascal's wager.
Is there a problem with that?
I'm agnostic. I can't disprove one way or the other. So I'm not saying there is
Right.
one. I'm not saying, but I don't know. So it'd be stupid to just say I know there's not one. You can't prove it to me, but you can't disprove it either.
Right. I can't disprove or prove. What I can say is what I believe. I mean, and
And that is the crux of faith as a whole.
because I believe Christianity is a beautiful, if done correctly, is a beautiful moral compass. I mean, morally, if you listen to the tenets of Christianity at its core, you're going to be good, you're going to love your neighbor, you're going to do right, you're going to follow the commandments. I mean, you're flawed, and I mean, even in Christianity, it tells you you're flawed, but still, it brings to light that moral compass that we'll talk about in a little bit, where good and evil. Like, it teaches good and
Yeah.
evil.
Well, I think the beautiful thing with Christianity, specifically, and other religions have this too, is that yes, it says that you are flawed, but just because you're flawed doesn't mean you're wasted. Right? There's always room for salvation and redemption, and that's that path to constantly better yourself. We all have our personal demons that we fight with. Call them sins, call them whatever you will, but just because you're not wasted just because of it, right? We're going to do wrong, but there's always a pathway back. And that's the free will. Learn from your mistakes, and here's a pathway back. And that was the point for Christianity, I think, is to give us that pathway back to salvation, right? And to guarantee that for us, for the people who believe in Christianity.
but it also acknowledges an irredeemable people.
Ah,
The only time it's irredeemable is at death. In my religion, anyway. The only
okay,
time
so going back to the difference
once
between
that last
Baptists and
breath.
Methodists. In the Methodists, they believe in something called a second, which is also referred to as holiness. Ideal being that it is not enough to say you believe in Christ, but once you have been saved from your initial sins that you did throughout your lifetime, you still are born. Everybody is born with what's called the
The
sin
what?
of Adam.
Sorry, you
I'll
cut
just-
out there.
The
Yeah.
sin,
Original sin,
Okay.
like
the
Oh,
sin
okay.
of Adam and Eve.
Gotcha.
Okay, it's called the inbred sin or the first sin, and it's inbred. The ideal is, and again, I'm just going with the theology. I'm not going with the theology. So the ideal being is that everybody is born with this inbred sin, and simply say, asking for Christ's forgiveness is not enough to remove that particular sin. It can remove all the sins that you have committed throughout your lifetime, but you are still have that inbred sin within your heart. And this also goes into the idea you asked about divinity earlier, and if divinity, we are shaped by divinity or divinity is us. The ideal being that is once you have asked for forgiveness, once you have begin to walk the walk, you are later going to come to terms with the Holy Spirit or whichever version of the Holy Spirit you want to call it, and he brings about sanctification. And sanctification is removing of that first sin. And from there, you can strive to be closer to divinity. It doesn't mean that you can't backslide. It does mean that you have chosen to constantly strive forward enough that you are no longer bound by that first sin. That is the theology of Methodism, holiness groups. A lot of your Pentecostal also believe in that.
Fascinating, all the different views that different religions have.
Oh, sure,
Under one umbrella that is Christianity. I mean, you don't see that in like a whole lot of religions. I mean,
You do. It does exist.
Oh,
There is
yeah.
many
Definitely.
facets of Islam as there is Christianity. There's as many facets of Judaism as there is in Christianity. We don't know it because we
The
don't
same way with
see it on a
Muslims.
regular basis. I talk to my friend up in New York all the time who is, raised Orthodox Jew, and she tells me all the time about the different forms of Judaism and how they approach different aspects of their religion. A lot of Jews actually don't believe in an
sure.
afterlife.
I mean,
It just depends on which
if you
version
go
you're
in-
talking about.
if you look around Israel, you'll see people wearing, I can't remember what the name of the garb is that the men wear. Basically looks like those like night shirts, old school like sleeping night shirts. I'm not trying to make fun of them. I just don't know the name of them.
The Hasidic
they-
Jews.
Yeah, they have different patterns, and those different patterns represent different sects of the faith based on the teachings of a specific rabbi. And it's like Spartans in Scotland and Ireland. I mean, there's so many of them. It's the same way with like Muslims. I mean, you got the Shiites and so on and so forth. You got the whirling dervishes, and there's so many different aspects. There's a branch of Jewish people who believe in Jesus Christ. They still practice Judaism and Christianity, right? And they believe Jesus Christ was Savior, so on and so forth. So, and you're going to find different tiers, levels, facets of just about any faith out there that is still being practiced. If you don't like the way this one fits, try this one, kind of thing. I guess you could say.
well, all the Abrahamic religions, at the very least, admit that Jesus was a prophet. Like that's where the big divide in most of the Abrahamic religions is between Jesus being a prophet of the Lord or the Son of the Lord.
Right.
Yeah, in order to be titled Christian, you actually have to believe that Christ died and rose again, that and was born of the Immaculate Birth. You have to believe those four things in order to be.
Hmm.
And once again, also, I want to reiterate something here real quick. I think I haven't done a good job at. I talk a lot about my background in Methodism, but I personally, on a personal level, consider myself to be an all paths to God. So I just am very well versed in the Methodist doctrine.
I mean, same here. I mean, I revert back to like my Baptist upbringing a lot. But Hamrock, there's a really good book you should read that says it's called "God Is Not One." I have a copy of it. I'll bring it for you. It's and whether you want to like buy into it or not, but it dives into that. Are all these paths all paths to God or not? And he in the book he says they're not. That's the approach that he takes, and he literally starts picking apart these different aspects of like Hinduism, Judaism, Christianity, so on and so forth. It's called "God Is Not One." I got a copy. I'll let you read it. It's a good read. It's pretty thin.
Mm. So, I don't know if I heard anything. So, Greg, is it? Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. So John was asking earlier about the divinity. What was it exactly, John? That are we projecting good elements about ourselves into an idea of what God is? Is that right, John?
It's something that Feuerbach says. The divine is nothing more but human nature personified, free from its limits, made objective.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm just wondering what you think.
I mean, that's pretty close, like, to what I believe. Personally, I'm 99.995% certain that every religion is just a myth, and the gods are characters that have personifications of storytelling elements that are needed for whatever moral or story they're trying to tell.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the Old Testament, like there's how many stories where God is personified, like Jehovah is personified as like a volcano or the lava or some other like convenient elemental force.
Yeah. Burning bush.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm no expert at any religion, so I just try to look at the good side of things. Look on the bright side of life.
Well, I mean, this is something that I think is worth discussing. Feuerbach says that God suffers means, in truth, nothing else than God is a heart. A being without suffering is a being without a heart. The mystery of the suffering God is therefore the mystery of feeling sensibility. God is a feeling. Being is only the religious paraphrase of the proposition. Feeling is absolute, divine in its nature.
Interesting.
God must suffer in order to make him more real.
Yeah. That just reminds me of. Sorry, go on. Sorry.
No. I mean, all throughout like religions, any religion, it talks about all of the gods being emotional. I mean, and if they weren't, what would their connection to us be anyway? So, a
Old
being without
Testament,
any,
every god.
I mean, even that's an emotion, right?
Yeah.
Anger, jealousy. So
Well, the Greek gods were pretty. The Greek gods are all sorts of petty and horny.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. But yeah, all gods have been
Jason dropped. He'll be back.
given emotional aspects. So and I think there's nothing wrong with that, not whatsoever. If you're thinking about God as a being and a higher being than us, you know, maybe God experienced emotions bad because of how limited we are in comparison. So who knows? Like I said, it's all faith, it's all belief. There's no absolute proof one way or the other. The only thing that we can say is if God exists, God must be greater, right? It's kind of like the tall man theory. There has to be a tallest man in the world, right? At any given time, somebody who is the tallest man in the world, that's like God. At any given time, there has to be a greater being. And
But if you can't,
we look down on that spec would be the same kind of aspect, right? I mean, we look through a microscope at an amoeba. What are we to that amoeba, right? A single cell organism that we can manipulate in any way, shape, or form, including its environment. If you're thinking about an all-encompassing God, yeah, we're just as microscopic in like all aspects.
well, sure, but God is a significantly greater, immeasurable creature, being, power, or force. If you can't detect it, sense it, measure it in any way, and it exists outside of time and space because it's omniscient, then how is it any different than something that doesn't exist?
If you can't quantify it,
Because if something doesn't exist, then there's nothing.
Sure, but if
And
you
then
can't
get into
quantify a
the,
thing,
and then well, that was the whole point of like the multiverse when we were talking about Stephen Hawkins earlier. I don't know if you were in here, but some of his last works pointed out to the beginning of time and something before the beginning of time. And he was even upset about it being an atheist because it pretty much laid the groundwork for proof that there is something before time that exists outside of space and time. You can't have nothingness. This isn't the never-ending story. The universe is completely infinite and vast. There's no such thing as nothingness. So you can't argue
even
something
now-
that doesn't exist.
Even our law of physics, conservation of energy, it was transformed in some way. There would have been something there before us in order to have what we are now.
Yeah, that's the theory of causality.
Mm.
And the biggest proponent of causality was probably, well, I shouldn't say proponent. He was the biggest. He tried to debunk Darwin, you know, with his theory of evolution. But the more and more science we learn, the more and more we know that there is more.
Mm.
I mean, if you would have went back 200 years ago and talked about dark matter,
Yeah.
I mean, it would have burnt you at the stake. And so we're finding out that there's energies in matter that exist that we still can't even quantify or qualify. I mean, there's particles in space they can't even trap in order to measure. But mathematically, we know that.
but simultaneously they've left traces behind, or even mathematical clues that they
Yeah.
exist.
We discovered when we answer one question, we got clues for another question and going, well, hang on, there's something pointing here, but we don't know what it is. Yeah.
okay. Well, I'll ask a question.
And that's kind of like the mathematical anomaly behind God is how everything fits together so perfectly mathematically and is able to exist at this point in the history of the universe so perfectly that for it just to happen randomly, completely randomly, the odds are just absurdly against it. I mean, they're looking right now for the Goldilocks planet, but just trying to find a planet with a star like ours. I mean, even if they find they have found planets in what they call the Goldilocks zone, right, of a star, but that star still doesn't get light the way that ours does, which would allow for even the evolution, if you want to go that far, the evolution of life on those planets as we know it, the life forms as we know it. So
But I mean,
just
But that doesn't mean that those planets couldn't cough up some sort of bacterial or other microscopic life forms that should we ever get to any of those planets, would be able to realize we're there.
yeah, but like I said, life as we know it. And what would that be like? Would it be like when the Spaniards first hit South America and the natives thought they were gods because they were wearing bright, shiny steel armor? I mean, that they were so much further advanced, right? In order for us to travel the millions of light years to another planet, do you know how much more advanced we're going to have to be technologically?
It's absurd and mind-boggling from our perspective right now. Get it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There was something.
And that's my.
Okay.
So even if you wanted to take the theory that God is an alien, right? I've had this conversation with people before. God is an alien, right? In order for an actual being, an alien being of this dimension, in this time and space, to travel from one planet that could support life from a star to here, the amount of technological power that being would have would still make us look like troglodytes. I mean, think of the medical advances and the things that a race that can travel that far is going to have to be able to do.
Well, I mean, if,
Like I said, I can't explain what God is, but I just know that much greater than me.
okay. So let's step into my next question. Good and evil. Is it necessary for the moral? I mean, because Christianity teaches us good from evil. Um, the Ten Commandments. I mean, there's other rules. Are they necessary for building a moral compass? I know we have empathy, and that's we're born with empathy, but I believe that our ethical and moral compass are taught, and I mean, are good and evil, are the Hitlers of the world and the Pol Pots and the Joseph Stalins there to teach?
Nature versus nature. You're looking at that aspect as well.
I would have to say yes, and I'm going to get very Asian here, but the yin and the yang, right? I mean, how do you judge what is good without having something bad to weigh it against? How do you know what's truly daylight without darkness, kind of thing? Now, I think all those are decided that they're all social constructs, even if they're laid down by laws of divinity, if you will. There are certain things you don't do because you don't want the societal kickbacks, right? You don't murder because you don't want the electric chair type thing. There's always something that you don't want, a reinforcer for, a behavior or something to dissuade a certain behavior. But I think evil has to be there because it's what we judge good by. And I think that changes. I mean, what we may consider evil, somebody else may not. I'm not going to try to lay my religious blanket over what's good and what's evil, and just discussing on is evil necessary, and think of it more holistically. But culturally, you know, there are cultural evils that are specific to certain cultures. I mean, I'll fight you over a cheeseburger, but Hindus think I'm a nut, right?
Well,
So,
there is a group, I can't remember where they're at, they're in Africa, that in their culture, if you are of a certain age, they murder you. Like,
Mm.
you, and it's meant to the young shall thrive. So the older crowd get basically euthanized
Mm.
as a ritual. So, but we're taught that murder is bad. I also believe that evil is evil and good are on the same evolutionary scale than we are.
yeah, it changes. But what is considered evil, 400 years ago, compared to what's considered evil now, are just bad. I mean, you're talking about social norms, the laws
Yeah.
of society.
What was it
they
in the
change.
Old Testament? There was, if women shall speak up in church, men have the right to gag them and take them outside of the church and beat them. That's definitely not acceptable now.
No, no.
Well, you
Times change. No.
Well, I mean, hell,
During our
the Old Testament, you catch your kid coming home after a long Saturday or a long Friday night, comes home drunk. You're well within your rights to drag him out in front of the town council the next morning and have him beaten to death with rocks.
Yeah.
I mean, times change. Society changes, social norms change. What's considered evil. And I think if you look back to the basic Ten Commandments and the basic preaching of Jesus, love your neighbors as you would yourself, and you look like the Ten Commandments, those are still pretty much standard, for what's considered good behavior.
But
Pretty much cover
again,
it all.
Christianity calls for, like, in my opinion, a fantastic moral compass. I don't think that religion needs to be like banished. I think it's a great use for a society to build upon. I mean,
Religion's going to evolve. Even from another 100 to 1,000 years from now, it's going to evolve. It definitely probably won't look similar to what it is now. There may be less religions, more religions, but the thing is it's changing. It's changed in the past 2,000 years. But hopefully, one can only hope that in the future it still maintains its core idea of love and respect for each other.
Well, look, I mean,
Right. So here's a perfect example
hold
of
on,
that
Jason.
evolution
Jason's
is-
trying to say
Mike?
something.
look, I mean, if you
yeah,
look
you're
at the
real faint.
Bible as a whole, even today's, say, 100 years ago, there are aspects of the Bible that simply just do not apply today that were
Right.
great and very important survival of the people who it was written for, written by, or written to. Let's give homosexuality as a big one. Okay, a lot of people, the Bible does demonize homosexuality. Look, 100 years ago, your very survival was based off of whether or not you could produce children to work. That was just part and parcel to life. And
Not
so,
multiply.
there are things that were demonized, like, dietary, the not eating of pigs. You have a lot of that. We know now through science that poultry has a horrible shelf life. And there wasn't exactly refrigeration at that time. So eating poultry.
Eat bottom-dwelling creatures.
Right. And you look now, I mean, like, even how they prepared their beef. If you look at the laws of kosher and how they prepare their beef, A lot of it has to do with draining the blood out of the meat. And this is all to help preserve the meat, keep from having bacteria set in, is the ultimate result of it. And they would cook their meat fully, and that was part of kosher. But it's also, again, a way to keep
Get rid
from
of
getting
parasites.
sick. So there are a lot of things that were written into the Bible that I believe were at the time kind of, hey, this is how not to kill yourself, idiot, that
Right.
don't apply today. So there are aspects of the Bible that just aren't going to work in today's. One of the big ones that always killed me. Hey, I got a brother. He's got a wife. If he dies, she's my wife. That would not fly very well today, but it was very common in the times of the Bible.
Yeah.
I know that'd be horrible. Any of the women my brothers have been married to, I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole.
My brother married my ex. No.
Well, he believes in it then.
He
But-
believes in it.
But yeah, so a lot of that, in the early Old Testament stuff was literally there just for like health and to make sure a society thrived. That's goes back to like the laws of society and societal contracts, which
Yeah.
must
What was
exist.
it? Muhammad, he had all those wives, but they were wives of the fellow soldiers, warriors that he went into battle with, and said, I would take care of them if any of you fall. But interpretation now, it's, well, yeah.
Whereas Solomon was a horn dog.
Oh, sure.
Well,
Absolutely.
I mean, you have, and then we came over here to this country, and then we've got the Mormons, and I mean that has changed over the last 100 years.
Somewhat. There's still some that believe in it and do it on the down low with the Mormons, but that was all done to breed more Mormons. That was the sole purpose of that.
Yeah.
They weren't getting enough converts, and they wanted to make sure that their branch of Christianity survived. So let's breed them,
Got to push those rookie numbers up.
right?
Pretty
Expand
much.
the brand. Expand the brand is the
Where I'm trying to
great quote.
remember, what was it, the Mennonites, I think, ended up breeding it. It ended up through their oppressive belief in non-sexuality, ended up actually dying off because they couldn't breed more.
Oh, Shakers.
Shakers, yes, the Shaker.
I know some Mennonites, but no, yeah, the Shakers did that. Yeah, you're not born a Shaker; you convert. So they ended up dying out because they didn't breed more, right?
Yeah, I
And
mean,
they
go ahead, Jay.
no, go ahead. I didn't.
No, go ahead.
Well, I do want to go back to something before I got kicked off the Discord and had to hop back on. You were talking about good and evil being a necessity. One has to exist for the other one to be the point I was trying to get at was to add to what Matt said. One is necessary to measure the other's existence. Can't measure the light if you don't have. In art, the first thing they teach you is probably seen, all of you have seen. Well, if you look at, for example, just a prime example of this, Ashrad's symbol that he has on for his little icon for his Discord figure. You'll notice it's done completely in black and white. This is that image without one would simply be either an all black image or an all white image. You can't get a shape out of it until you draw that until you have the
Contrast.
contrast.
Yeah.
So the same works with good and evil. You can't have good or what we call good unless evil exists. One has to be the other. It has to.
Go ahead, Dilo.
But then, if evil is necessary, why is it a punishable offense in religion?
I thought it's guilt, our feeling that helps us define good and evil.
Well, just because it's just because that's the doesn't mean strive. It doesn't mean it's okay to strive for.
I mean, just because Pol Pot killed 1,000,000 or 100,000 people doesn't mean that you should.
Yeah, it's there as a non-example. I talked about that earlier. Things that you want. It's that contrast. Hopefully, we only need one bad example.
But
So
if
then
they
everyone
must exist,
Not to do.
Again, we're going back to the idea of free will. Just because it exists doesn't mean you have to adhere to it.
but for it to exist, it has to be done.
No,
It
not
has
at all.
to be
I don't
done.
know what makes you think that. What makes that?
We can define evil without doing it. We can define evil without doing it.
Well, I see where D'Lo is going with this, and it's something that I brought up, like the Pol Pots of the world, the Joseph Stalins, the things that have been done is how we judge. So things must be done in order to judge. So somebody has to do the crime in order for us to go, that was wrong.
Us to say that it is a crime now,
Right.
Right.
Or
but we don't need to repeat it.
right.
No. Yeah.
And the mid 20th century had too many examples.
But at the same time,
Yeah.
his comment of then why do we punish people for doing it?
No, I'm saying in religion, if it is something that must exist, that means it was put there by. So how can you be punished for something like that?
Because just because it
Well,
must
in
exist doesn't
Christianity, it's
mean
called
necessarily
temptation.
you have to adhere to it. Again, we're going back to the concept of free will. You choose what you want to do.
But if God wants you to act in one way, why would He give you the choice to act contrary?
God doesn't tell you how to
Free will.
act.
To prove it,
He can suggest, but he won't
No, He
tell
tells
you
you
how
how
to
to
act.
act because there's a punishment
Yeah.
for not acting that way.
right?
Or maybe we made that up. Who knows?
Is
Because
I
what we
mean,
have now is forgiving.
I like what a comedian Jim Jeffries said. How do we know that hell is a punishment? God only tells us. The devil has never told us anything about hell. He never wrote a book.
I thought it was man that told us that.
I mean,
Because the description that was is that hell is an absence from God, and we just made up fire, brimstone, and all
So that's
that.
the original interpretation.
Hmm.
So that gets into another debate on theology. Yeah, the original hell was just the absence of God's grace, and later on it changed. It continued to change as Christianity continued to migrate north and then west. Certain aspects of other cultural beliefs were bringing into it, they can pretty much define exactly when the whole fiery pits of hell came into place.
Yeah, it's when the Persian Empire and the Palestine met with the Zoroastrian Empire.
Oh, the Zoroastrians, yeah, they still exist, but it was actually brought into Christianity when they were taking over the Celtics in the British Isles, because they had a fire realm with salamanders, and that's when the devil got horns, is because of Ceranos, or Hernan, the Celtic horned god. And they wanted to those things as being evil in the Christian religion. So it kind of that we had this discussion earlier about culture and how things get absorbed, and that's one of the things that was absorbed into Christianity as a thing that was evil.
Sure. Well, Hamrock was saying earlier that there's still groups of Jews that don't necessarily believe in an afterlife. That the Jewish idea of a Christian life started to become more solidified when they ran into the Zoroastrian Empire. That's all I was trying to say.
Okay, so
now,
Jews
as far as
and Christians, two completely different critters.
Sure, except that one directly evolved from the other.
Yeah, but they are two completely different.
Sure, but the Christianity coming later got to have a much more solid template for what their afterlives looked like. The Jews kind of had to improvise as they were going along. And there are some if you look at the archaeology a little bit, there's like some pretty solid identifiers for like when they picked up certain traits and what empires they were dealing with at the time.
Religion always picks and chooses things it wants.
So am I
Yeah,
amiss to believe that as we conquered other people or interacted with other people as Christians, we adapted and conformed
Yep.
using
Oh, absolutely.
using their religions.
Oh,
Well,
absolutely.
That's where
sure.
we get half of our holidays. I mean, why do you have eggs on
Yeah.
Easter if it has to do with the resurrection in it? You know, the original
Man, you got
Santa
a
Claus
Christmas
was Odin,
tree or a wreath?
burning
Has
with a
nothing to
Yule
do
log.
with the
I mean,
birth of Christ.
No. So that's just a way to convert people. And that was the whole point of bringing those aspects in. So, and I probably get stoned for this. I've got some Muslim friends that would hate me for this one. But even the Muslims did it. If you go back and you look at Allah, the name of Allah existed long before Islam. It was actually the name of like a desert god. So they just adapted that name, Muhammad did, when he started like penning out the Muslim religion, because so many people already worshiped a god named Allah who had nothing to do with what he was writing originally. I mean, we do that. We adapt aspects of a culture into our own as we grow and we move.
Are we the?
So-
I mean, is it? I say we. Is Christianity, and this is me asking a question I do not know, the only religion that does not have a name for its god?
Yahweh.
We have several names.
Yeah.
Yahweh.
Well, there's Yahweh, but I mean,
Jehovah.
Jehovah, yeah, which just translates to the breath, which
Yeah.
represents creation.
Yeah, the true name of God isn't supposed to be enunciable.
Yeah.
Um,
we got
Apparently,
things
I've never
come
heard
close.
that one before.
apparently there's somebody that's supposed to know it. There's a really cool. It's a sect of the Jewish faith. There's one person who's supposed to know the true name of God, and on his deathbed, he whispers it to his successor, and they only speaks it one time a year during a specific prayer.
is that Hasidic?
I'm not sure. I just remember reading up on it years ago, and I thought it was kind of cool. I'm like, he knows the real name.
But even
Mhm.
back a long time ago, if you were to mention God, like the name Yahweh, there was the whole ceremony around it. Before you did it, you had to clean yourself, take all your clothes that you had walked in, take them off, put gowns and all that, and then proceed into a smaller circle closer to God and all that. And then after you'd finished making your prayers or whatever, then you had to cleanse yourself before you went back out into the world. And whereas now it's anybody you just mention it flippantly. So times have changed in
In these days, I mean, there's a fine line between religion and cult.
That's true.
Yeah.
Sometimes I don't think a line exists, but yeah,
yeah.
that line that definitely turns into a dotted line at points.
Well, I mean,
Cult culture.
sometimes I mean, in America, it's just a tax form.
Star Trek's
For
a
some
cult.
people.
Star Wars is a cult.
Well, we'll touch on this on another subject, but on another podcast. But Scientology is a known religion that, for all intents and purposes, is a cult.
What? Sorry.
Scientology.
They're creepy.
They're also
I love these
cult,
people. I love talking to them at the flea market.
I was in
I
one of their
love
actual,
going to flea
like,
markets and
skyscrapers, like, because they have a big building in downtown Portland, Oregon, and I went in there.
They're huge in Australia.
Yeah, I don't notice them. That's the weird
I think
thing.
everywhere now.
They literally
Yeah.
had a freaking skyscraper downtown when I lived in Oregon, in Portland.
Mm.
But I mean, like I said before, Christianity at its core is not only one of the first religions, but probably the
I
purest.
know. Oh,
What do you mean? There was a ton of religions before Christianity.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with Greg on this one. I mean, Judaism travels back almost 6,000 years prior to. 6,000 years is a really long fucking time.
Okay.
Let's be honest. Christianity is just an offshoot of Judaism. That's why it's called Judeo-Christian. And
There's a different story there, but
It's an Abrahamic religion.
There's
It's still
yeah,
Abrahamic religion.
I mean, it's a different story though altogether.
I mean, you have the
No,
old
the-
Egyptian pants,
yeah, it sprang out the Jewish people.
the Sumerian, and the Babylonian.
I mean, under Judaism, Jesus is a prophet. In order to be a prophet, you have to be married.
Well, under Judaism, Jesus actually a rabbi.
Well, you have to be. I thought it was prophet.
Referred to as a rabbi.
No, he's a rabbi under Judaism. He is a prophet
Yeah.
under Islam.
Yeah.
Okay, well, he's a rabbi. He's not the son of God.
Depends on which branch of Judaism. I mentioned that earlier. There's a whole branch of Judaism that believes he was.
Mm.
Remember, it started out as a sect of Judaism anyway. I mean,
Well, that's true. And
pre-
I've been reading some Richard Carrier and a couple other guys, and they were talking about the Jewish angelology. And if you go back to the temple cult era, in Judaism, in that era, there was a angel that by the name of Jesus that there was a bit of discussion about which angel came first, him or Lucifer. So when Jesus started getting euhemerized, they had an angel to lift from stories from just kind of sitting there ready to go.
Well, I think we've.
But all of it gives man some kind of higher universal purpose.
and don't we want that? I mean, at its core, is it really a bad thing to think that there's something else after our measly time here? I mean, 13.8 billion years so far.
Yeah,
in the
but
universe.
The
We
universe
only
doesn't
get
show
about
that. Like
The universe doesn't show what.
that we matter.
That's the point, right? Is there something really wrong with wanting to think that we matter to the universe as vast as it is?
No, it's a way for people to give themselves purpose.
Right. And at
Elaborate.
its core, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Well, I don't use religion for my purpose. I find my own purpose in life. That I believe everybody has to find their own purpose in life, whether it be through religion, just believing that the sun will come up every day. Like my family, I live for my family. That is my purpose. In
Oh,
life.
sure.
I don't aspire that
And-
to
and, you know-
religion. I don't aspire it to faith. I aspire it to because that's what we're meant to do is progeny. Like as animals, that's what we do. We eat and we breed.
That's a completely other topic, but
I mean, that's the base of our like biological existence, right? We consume, we reproduce. But you know, you can explain a lot of things like that. Fire does that, and we're so much more than fire. But I don't think there's anything wrong with people wanting to find another purpose and find comfort in the possibility of an afterlife or a heaven. And to be completely honest, I mean, I've searched my whole life for some sort of faith. I mean, I've run the gambit, and I've got a lot of really eclectic beliefs because of it. And it's like, my purpose is also my family. And the more that I have focused on my family, I think the closer to God my relationship with God has become, not vice versa. So God has brought me closer to my purpose, but my purpose has brought me closer to God. So everything I do anymore is based on like my family, what's best for them, what I want for them, just wanting to leave a legacy and contribute to the community. I mean, I changed an entire career. I did paradigm shift when I was in my 30s. Went from the corporate world, writing my own schedule and making good money, to math teacher, at high school.
Yeah.
I mean, I get paid diddly squat compared to what I used to get paid. And I had to take out a whole bunch of loans to do it. And it's all because I wanted to have a greater purpose. And by trying to achieve that, it's given me more faith. And the more faith I have, I find the better things happen in my life. I think like earlier when we were talking about evil and good, and if good must exist, why is it punished? For the same reason that good is rewarded, right?
You can't.
The
Good
amount,
is not always rewarded. Evil is not always punished.
all in its own time. So, and I think
That's
I
not
mean,
that's where
like
kind of
we
like
see
the
it in the
afterlife.
world.
And Dilo, I'd have to
Earthly
say,
rewards and spiritual rewards are two different things.
in today's climate, and I will, and by presenting that, I'm going to say over the last 100 years, we really haven't punished the big picture of what we think is evil. I mean, Pol Pot got house arrest, but they are
House
kind of
arrest.
house arrest. He killed over 100,000 people, and they just put him in his house and said, "Stay there because we don't know what to do with you." It's, I'm not going to say glorified. I'm going to say it is used to tell a story, and
But you use Pol Pot as a bad example. If you use, say, go to China, Mao killed like 100 million people, and he's got statues.
well, Maoist. I mean, we can go into Maoist as, is it a religion or is it a form of government? Some people would tell you it's both.
Well, a lot of religions are.
Right. I mean,
I mean,
that's what that Pol Pot was a Maoist, and
Islam is both. Judaism is both in a certain sense. So there's a lot of religions that are also governments. It's a cultural decision.
But if the planet just blew up, if an asteroid just hits our planet, which is a random chance that could happen, us
Sure.
not existing anymore does not affect the fabric of the universe.
the universe ceases to exist.
No, it doesn't. It's still there.
No,
Well-
we cease to exist.
We cease to exist.
Yeah, we see,
Yeah, well,
which will happen.
perception is
I
reality.
mean,
Ergo, a perception of reality that I are
Right.
ceases. But do we cease to exist? Is my question. With Christianity or with a lot of religion in an afterlife, the world blows up, but yet we go on
Yeah, but I
in
don't
one form
actually.
or another.
I don't believe in God, but I don't believe that there's not a God. So, like, you can't show me evidence of what you're saying. Either
Not
way,
saying that, but
so
that's-
I have to
but
go
you
with
asked-
what I know.
You asked earlier the question of, or going earlier with what Matt said, that I believe is the reason why a lot of people religion. It gives them hope that they are not just a spec the grand picture, that they have more to offer, or that their existence is not just some fleeting moment in time, that they achieve the immortality, that there is more to this.
Oh, no, I believe I
Or to
achieved
quote
immortality.
Beauty and the Beast, there's more than this provincial life.
I believe I
Sorry.
achieved immortality through my children, though. Not
Well, I mean, at that point, I think what Jason's touching on, is something we can't quantitate either, which is a soul. Do we have
Right, again,
one?
yes.
Do we have one? Do we not have one? I mean, that's a
But I believe if
infinite.
you're going to believe in a God, then soul is not that.
You're right. If you're going to believe in a
Well,
God, then the soul isn't far off.
There's plenty of things I would love to believe in or love to believe true, but I don't know that they are true, so I can't believe them.
That's why it's called faith.
And that breaks down to the initial ideal of, do you have faith?
I have faith in certain things, but they're all things that I know to be true for the most part.
And
That's not, by definition, not faith. That's knowledge.
And that's the person to figure
Yeah.
out how they want to work that out for themselves. We're not. I
Yeah,
don't
that's
think
like
either
a-
me or Matt are trying to argue that what we're saying will work for you. But what we're saying is, for our perspective, that is how we answer that question or that comment that you make. What's the fucking point? Well, that is the point. I'm going on. I'm not just a fleeting time. I believe that. So whether you do or not,
Right.
you have to answer that question for yourself.
Yeah, I'm not here to try to change anybody's like spiritual beliefs.
No.
or anything like
I
that.
was just giving you from
But
my
you
point.
said there are things you believe in because you've seen them. And that there's a quote in the scriptures, like after the resurrection, but with Thomas, doubting Thomas, he said he wouldn't believe until he laid his hands on Christ, stuck his fingers in the wounds.
Yep.
And Jesus showed up. He just showed up. He didn't come through the door. In the scripture, it says he just showed up. There was no door opening or anything like that. He offered the wound up to Thomas, and Thomas didn't stick his fingers in it. And he said, "Blessed are you because you see, but blessed are those who do not see but still believe." Right? And that's the whole point in faith. Doubting Thomas, he saw Jesus come back after the resurrection. So it's kind of like that whole thing. If you've ever seen the movie Constantine, they get into that.
Yeah.
And the angel, she's like, "No, you have faith because you've seen it, right? You believe now because you've seen it, right? You don't have faith because you didn't see it, And that's the whole thing. Faith is faith. You have faith because you believe, not because you see it. That is not faith. That's not belief. That's definitive proof, right? That's something that you can lay your physical hands on, and you're not going to get that. Some people may experience something that's completely divine in nature or very spiritual that awakens them, that proves it to them, and you can't take that away from them. People have like near-death experiences where they see light and hear angels, and people have near-death experiences. They come out the other side looking for a church because they felt themselves burning up, and they were dead on the table. So you have to take their personal accounts, and I know that's anecdotal, but you have to take their personal accounts for what it is. It's their personal
that can be
accounts.
equated to what is that drug? DMT?
DMT.
That can be equated to DMT that's released at the moment of death, and then you're brought back. I mean, it's a hallucinogen.
Yeah, you never know. There have been people that's been dead for like 10, 15 minutes and brought back and have these stories, these encounters. There's a lot of them. For it to be just a coincidence, in my opinion.
Yeah, if your brain's been cut off from oxygen for 5-10 minutes, you're likely to remember all kinds of stuff that didn't happen.
There's in India, they believe that you can be reincarnated into an already living person, like once you die. And there's this really interesting case, and India still has classes. They outlawed them years ago, but they still have them, and people still follow them. You don't marry above your caste, right? And nobody wants to go down in caste because that's going down in the class, that's going down in poverty. You lose rights. People look down upon you. There's literally the untouchables. right? That they're considered so unclean that you don't want to touch them because that makes you unclean. This girl dies, right? And they bring her back, but she has no idea where she is or who she is. Well, she knows who she is. She has no idea where she is. And she has all these memories of this other family and these people. And she has names. She has memories of things that happened, so on and so forth, right? And they believe in this over there very, very much. And what they believe is the spirit of another girl was reincarnated into their daughter's body after it died. And when the body came back, it came back with the different girl's spirit. Well, that girl gets up and says, I got to go home now. And she went to live with these other people who accepted her with open arms. And she has all these memories that are completely accurate and factual. It's an anomaly. And they have never met. The people have studied it. They have never met. This girl died way before. But she came back with all these memories of this other girl. And she went down a caste system in order to do this. She put herself in poverty to live with this family that she loved, that for all intent and purpose she had never met. But she had all these memories of them, their names, so on and so forth. There's things out there that's unexplainable, is what I'm trying to say. And as long as there's things I can't explain with science, I explain it with my faith, with my belief in God. So, the people see ghosts, do we call them crazy? Because they believe in the supernatural? Because they've seen a spirit or heard a spirit? There's countless stories on them. You just can't discredit that.
Yeah, but I don't link that to religion.
Well, right there, you're linking it to a power, something that exists that's outside the physical realm that can communicate with humans. At the very best, that's supernatural. So what is that? It's not a creature of this physical realm. Right? I mean...
Well, aren't you quantifying faith as you need faith in order to survive?
No, you don't need faith to survive. There are many people who are faithless that survive and thrive, right? And excel and achieve on this earth. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is you need faith in order to thrive and achieve in the afterlife. As primitive as that sounds, like ancient Egypt and so on and so forth. Having faith is not about worldly gains. It's about spiritual gains. And those spiritual gains can lead to worldly gains. I found that I have achieved so much more over the past few years of my life when I've become more spiritual, right? Than I ever did when I was in my 20s and early 30s. Much more. I mean, I took a downgrade in a job, but yet I've achieved so much more and so much more happiness. Because I decided to try to strive to do good.
So as we get older, we become more religious?
Again,
Some people.
individual.
Some people less.
Yeah, that's very much a mileage may vary kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because, I mean,
a lot of people, I think, as they get closer to the end of life, they want to believe more in an afterlife because they're faced with their own mortality. And that scares the shit out of most people.
Really, at the end of the day, what it boils down to is it's the individual's journey, choice. The
okay.
individual's what they want to do and what they don't want to do, whether or not they're capable of believing, whether or not they are not capable. There is no right or wrong answer, and that's the thing. It's not a matter of what's right or wrong here. It's simply what you want, what you believe, and that's okay.
Okay.
I mean, I got friends that are Satanists, straight up atheists. They run the gamut. I don't try to change their mind. That's not my place. I can just live the way I do and hope I inspire somebody through the way I live.
So here's a question for the two of you. God says to love everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But we condemn Satanism?
I never said that. I said I have friends who are actual open Satanists.
Well, I know the
Mm.
Christian faith condemns Satanism. And how would you condemn a faith that, if you're to love everyone unconditionally,
Uh-huh.
how can.
I think
You can love a person and hate their actions. I love my little brother, but I hate how he acts.
Yeah.
Um, I hate what he does and the type of person he is. I love him. I fight for him. I take the bullet for him. Doesn't mean I have to like the type of person he is.
I mean, one of the actual teachings of Christ was love the,
Right, love the sinner.
and
But
so
not the
with
sin.
That basically, yeah, and you don't have to agree with what somebody's doing, or even like what they're doing. That's not the point. I'm not here to tell you what to do, and that's. I think that is one of the big problems with people who get fanatical into religion. Is I'm right because I believe I'm right, and therefore you're wrong, and I have to press that on you. But that's not what the religion says you.
Okay.
You know, so literally Christ spoke on this. And if you read I forget which one it is, one of the letters. I mean, one of the apostles. He talked about, he condemned the actual Sadducees because he said, walk, let he who without sin cast the first stone. I mean,
That actually was added to the Bible. That wasn't in it originally. That passage.
no, that one actually is one that everybody thinks is actually part of the Bible that wasn't. Love thy the golden rule. What's the golden rule?
Treat others as you would have them treat you.
Yourselves. That actually isn't in the Bible.
Okay, well, this is my final question because we've been at this for almost 2 hours now.
You should know better than to invite me.
Oh no, the American today, we either have a 7-minute attention span or over an hour and a half attention span. We'll watch videos over an hour and a half or 7 minutes, no less, or no more. So there's a break between 7 minutes and an hour and a half where we just turn it off.
Typical quickie, all done in 7 minutes.
Right.
Damn it.
In this, I'm going to go political for this last bit. In the political climate that we're in 2020, how much do you think God plays a role in bringing people together? Is he as important today as he was 15 years ago?
Ooh, that's a good one. You could probably turn that into a whole segment there, buddy. Because I think with polarization of the country, I think it's a huge topic that people kind of skirt around. But either you're extreme left and typically not religious, or you're extreme right and conservative and very religious. So I think our two political parties have gone one way or the other, and a lot of the
Hi.
hello.
Oh, sorry, my tablet.
Your tablet wants to get in on it.
Yeah.
But so where was I going with that? But no, I think it's a huge topic because it's right now Christianity is being demonized, and people who are Christian are automatically considered small-minded, backward thinkers, not forward-thinking, so on and so forth, and that's totally not true. I sit in a church with an 86-year-old old pastor who might tell you homosexuality is a sin, but we have an openly homosexual like couple that sits up there and he hugs them every day when they come in and out the door. So we got all kinds of go to my church. You know, whether or not you believe something's said, it's not your place. It's God. We got conservatives in our church. We got liberals in our church. We got people who believe we got pro-choice. We got pro-life, and they sit side by side. Yeah, they may get in debates sometimes, but I think Christianity or faith has become one of the things that's used to polarize people in this country for political gain. It's being demonized. If you're religious, then they think that your political opinions is going to be based off of that religion. That's one of the things that John F. Kennedy, as the Catholic, had to overcome. A lot of people thought that if we had a Catholic president, we might as well have the Pope as the president because whatever the Pope said he would do, kind of thing. And I think that's getting pushed around a lot, and is coming from a white Christian male. Anytime you say white Christian male now, people go nuts, right? You must be like an idiot. You're uneducated. You're against all this. You're against all that. You're trying to oppress people and force them into your religion. Not so. Definitely not so. So there's a lot of misconceptions about it. But
on the street level, that's fine. Like, you might have people of all kinds of political views going to like your church, and they all get along fine. But once you get to the national level, and you get to the policymakers, the extremists that are anti-abortion and anti-this and anti-that and all that seem to have all of the pull in Washington, and that's where that misconception gets started. So, got to work on that image problem on the street, because on the national, kind of a hard sell.
So that goes both ways. People are going to have their opinions, and a lot of times it's going to be based on their faith. And to try to push something that's against their faith on them politically is just as bad as trying to push something that's faith based on somebody else using politics. It has no place in it, in my opinion, either way or the other. And just because somebody votes pro-life, doesn't actually mean they're voting pro-life because of their religious beliefs. That's a complete farce,
Well, you
in
see
my
the
opinion.
Republican Party standing less and less on religion now. Like you have some old school guys that are still, but for the most part, the party as a whole isn't the big Christian. You don't see them bringing out the Christian image like they used to.
Funny, because the last time I checked, Pence was our vice president, and I'm pretty sure he's there just to shore up Trump's evangelical base.
Well, I believe D'Lo.
Even Obama went to church to do that.
Well, I believe D'Lo brings a point that the older crowd, and I would even say down to our generation, still has that Christian ideology. But I believe as we progress, it's going to die out.
I don't know. It's still one of the fastest growing faiths in the world. So it's going to evolve. It's going to change. I don't think it's going to die out. Like at one point in time, you wouldn't find a church that had an openly gay person sitting in it. And that was just 50, 60 years ago. Now you can find churches full of them. I mean, it changes. Like that whole like evil is a cultural construct, right? And religion, you even said it yourself, religion changes based on culture. It adapts in order to stay relevant. Now it comes back to the core belief structures, but it's still going to adapt to stay relevant. And it's in the process of adapting right now, but it always will be. But it's definitely demonized as some kind of like backward thinking concept or something like that.
Well, sure. Like, it's not real hard to find a lot of ugly passages, and especially in the Old Testament, but the Bible in general has got a lot of backwards thinking in it.
It was written
Like,
2,000 years ago, buddy. I mean, come on.
Well, sure. Like,
You got to take its lessons. So you look at the lessons that the passages are trying to teach, the morals that they're trying to teach. But and we talked about this earlier on like eating of pork and stuff like that. There was a reason for it. It doesn't exist now. There are social practices and cultural practices back then that are practiced now. There are cultural practices all over the world that we would consider backwards and ugly and disgusting.
sure. Okay.
There's a
So-
religious group that wade upstream and pull like half burnt dead bodies out so they can eat the flesh off of them for their religion. I mean, that exists today. I mean,
Sure it does.
it's what you do with it, man. And Christians don't. It's not Old Testament, man.
I would implore you all to watch it was on Netflix at one point. It was called Jesus Camp, where they take these young children and put guns in their hands and teach them that if they won't convert, then they're not worth it. It's a branch of Christianity. I mean, it's a branch of Christianity that I would call fanatical.
Branch Davidians
Well,
down
like we
in Texas,
discussed earlier
Jonestown, they
also,
exist all over the place.
let me chime in on that. Like we discussed earlier, you're going to have fanaticals in every camp that do stupid shit like that, and they don't necessarily adhere to the actual tenets of the faith. I mean, because a very ideal putting guns in people's hands and telling them Christ is not at all what Christ taught. But like, we talked earlier about, we'll take Antifa with the far left and the whole thing going on in Seattle right now. I think a lot of us would agree that you can be a liberal in today's society and see these assholes and think, what the fuck are you thinking? And, it's can't take one small group of nitwits and then try to judge the whole of the unit. And that is unfortunately where we're at. We want to go, oh look,
happens all
those
the
guys
time.
are assholes, so they all must be assholes. And it doesn't work that way.
Well, I mean, okay, to bring it back though to the political climate and God. So, if God does play a role in the political climate of today, then it's equated to the right and bigotry.
Bigotry. How's bigotry have to do with religion and God? Last
Well,
checked,
I mean, you would consider the far
I mean,
right.
the whole point of Jesus was to send like his faith out to the Gentiles and all children to the earth.
And I'm not
So-
saying I'm
You
trying
see
to.
bigotry everywhere, buddy.
Well, I know that, but the far right being prejudice and being who they are, how can you equate God with? I mean, how did they equate God with that? They equate.
Well, you could equate.
There are good Christians. There are good Christians. There are bad Christians. There's good Muslims. There's bad Muslims. And just saying the far right are all racist or bigots, that's it. You're going to have to come up with some numbers and proof because you're dealing.
Yeah,
in
that doesn't work
there,
either,
and
too.
You know what I think about absolutes.
This is.
I'm not
This is a completely.
far right. I'm actually a Democrat, but I'll fight for them here. I mean, I went out to the polls. I voted Democrat this time around. I'm a Democrat, but I'm a moderate Democrat. I'm what they call a conservative Democrat. Yeah, I'm socially liberal but fiscally conservative. Quit spending all my money and stay out of my pocket. I want the gays to protect their pot farms with machine guns. I mean, so, but to say an entire group is like a bigot because of their faith, are, I mean, just taking faith out of it, say an entire political group are bigots. I know some extreme right-wing black people, super conservative. They got Trump flags in their yard, wearing their MAGA hats. Are they bigots?
You can't equate. Okay, I'm. This
Can't
argument.
deal with
This
that.
argument can
Can't deal
go
with that.
way past.
Yes, you can.
I mean, well, I want to thank you guys, and we're gonna see where this
Love you,
goes.
John.
And yeah, I mean, I think Matt and Jason and D'Lo and Neil and Greg and Mike, who hasn't said a fucking word this entire time.
I think you said something earlier.
Yeah.
He tends to stay off there, but I think next week we're going to discuss education in America. So I know that's something that you wanted to touch on, Matt.
Oh yeah.
So
Even though it could get me fired.
well, we're gonna discuss this book right here, which is Reproduction in Education, Society, and Culture. And people can find on Amazon the book we were discussing tonight, which was The Essence of Christianity by Ludwig Feuerbach. And I want to again thank everybody, and we'll see you next week.